What's going on, guys? My name is Wade with TechDaily. So I've had the iPhone 11 for more than a week now. It's been my daily driver for the most part as I switch back and forth between it and the iPhone 11 Pro. And after using it day in and day out, I figured it was time to sum up all of my thoughts about Apple's latest and greatest budget offering in this video. And yes, I know budget isn't exactly the right term for a phone at this price point, but it's specifically Apple's budget iPhone, so that's why myself and a lot of other people refer to it as that. Now, if you've been following my channel for a while, you might know that last year's iPhone XR was my phone of choice. It was my personal phone, my daily driver, and it stuck with me from day one until the release of the iPhone 11 last month. I had the iPhone XS Max for a short while too when that phone launched, but ultimately I decided that for the price I was paying for that bigger, more expensive phone, I wasn't getting a proportional increase in value and features, usability, or really anything at all. And I think that's even more so the case this year when you look at Apple's iPhone lineup and you really start to compare the iPhone 11 to Apple's more expensive 11 Pro and Pro Max. The iPhone 11 starts at $699, which is $50 cheaper than the iPhone XR retailed for last year. And it's an interesting move by Apple. I personally can't remember the last time they launched an iPhone that was cheaper than the year before. But when you look at the market space and also examine how well the XR did last year, I think Apple probably realized that there's huge potential in offering a good device at a fair price. When you stack the iPhone 11 up against the 11 Pro and Pro Max, the $699 price point already looks pretty attractive. But this year, I think it's even harder to justify some $300 or $400 more for the Pro models when realistically, you're now only getting 3 or 4 more features when you pay the extra price. And for me, some of those better features aren't exactly a deciding factor. Obviously, the display on the iPhone 11, just like last year's XR, is less than ideal when you break down the specs on paper. Apple markets it as their liquid retina true tone display, but at the end of the day, it's just a 6.1-inch LCD panel at a measly 1792 by 828 resolution. And that's not great when you compare it to really any smartphone nowadays. But with the iPhone XR being so ridiculously popular last year, I think it was quickly proven that people just didn't care that much. Sure, everyone in the tech community last year was up in arms over such a low resolution LCD panel at this price point on the XR, but the average consumer didn't seem to mind. And on the iPhone 11, Apple doubled down on that decision and stuck with a display that realistically shouldn't be able to compete. But the thing is though, just like with the XR, the iPhone 11 has a really solid display if you look past the specs. It's bold and bright, and yeah, if you hold it up against an iPhone 11 Pro, the difference in quality and detail and colors is obvious from like even 3 feet away. But the iPhone 11's display can stand on its own as a pretty good viewing experience for most people. At any time, I can pick up my iPhone 11 Pro Max and enjoy an OLED panel, Apple's new Super Retina XDR display with 16 million colors, but I just don't ever really feel like I need to. I was fine with the XR throughout the year last year, and I'm more than fine with the iPhone 11 again this year. It's a personal preference, of course, and I know a lot of other people want the best viewing experience on their smartphone, and the iPhone 11 definitely isn't it. But for me, that fancy new display on the 11 Pro just isn't a difference in feature that would push me towards spending the extra money. Probably the biggest upgrade to all of Apple's iPhones this year came in the form of new camera hardware and software. Last year's iPhone XR had just one single rear lens and was limited. You could only take portrait pics of people, for example. This year, the iPhone 11 gains a secondary lens, a wide-angle shooter, but once again, it is still one lens shy of the 11 Pro, which packs that additional telephoto lens. But these two phones are practically identical in their shooting capabilities and features, something I was really surprised by, given Apple's tendency in the past to offer more features to the higher-end iPhone models. 95% of what you have on the more expensive iPhone 11 Pro is what you also get with the iPhone 11. You can utilize the new wide-angle lens to capture more in a single shot. There's improvements to portrait pictures too, with no limitations on what you can shoot. Night mode is also available on the iPhone 11, and the results look fantastic. There's super slow-mo, the same HDR shooting mode, the same 4K video recording capabilities, the same features, the same settings, the same everything. Side by side, there is literally no difference in picture or video quality in nearly every shooting mode between the two phones. The iPhone 11 is not limited at all and has no fewer features than the 11 Pro. The only difference is that the iPhone 11 lacks that telephoto lens, like I said, so you aren't getting optical zoom, just digital, and the Pro can utilize the telephoto lens when taking portrait pics if you wanted to, but the Pro can still use that wide-angle lens too, which is again the same as the iPhone 11. And if you want a more detailed camera comparison that demonstrates those two small differences, I do have a video on my channel already outlining that. But between the optical zoom and the one sort of additional portrait pic shooting mode, I don't think either of those is reason enough to opt for the 11 Pro. On the business side of things, offering the exact same camera features on a phone that's $400 less than what you would call your Pro model was probably a mistake by Apple. But for consumers, this really brings the iPhone 11 and iPhone 11 Pro that much closer together. And by the way, it's the exact same story with the front-facing camera too. You've got that upgraded 12-megapixel true depth camera with a wide angle and slow motion selfies and portrait pics and faster Face ID too, which by the way has certainly been a bit quicker and easier to use. So that's a big plus. But like I said, there's not really anything here that's going to differentiate this phone from the Pro when it comes to those cameras. Battery life on the iPhone XR last year was always really solid. It was probably the best battery life I ever had on any iPhone, and I was pretty content with Apple adding an extra hour or so of battery life on the new iPhone 11. It still lasts me a day and then some on a single charge, which is awesome. Unfortunately, Apple stuck iPhone 11 users with the same crappy 5-watt power adapter, so when you need to quickly charge up the phone, you have to go out and buy a compatible USB-C power delivery charger separately, and that's still very ridiculous. But besides that, I'm happy with the battery life on the iPhone 11. But Apple made even better improvements to the battery life on the iPhone 11 Pro and Pro Max. They added a couple more hours of life versus last year's phones, which is some of the more drastic battery improvements we've seen year over year. Interestingly enough though, those devices now just have comparable longevity to the iPhone 11, but battery life on last year's XS and XS Max was kind of crappy overall. So more or less, Apple simply evened the playing field, I think. I'm always sort of hesitant to talk about performance on a new iPhone because I'm usually saying the same thing. This is the fastest and smoothest iPhone. It has Apple's latest chipset, of course. It doesn't have a lot of RAM because iOS is so well optimized. Apps and games and everything are still fast. It's basically the same story year after year. But actually, with iOS 13, I think Apple sort of dropped the ball this year. I was, let's say, unlucky enough to use iOS 13 beta throughout the summer, which was an abysmal experience, to say the least. And yeah, I know it was beta software meant for developers, but as more and more developer releases came out in the weeks leading up to the iPhone launch, I think a lot of people started to question whether or not Apple would even be ready to ship the latest iOS with the latest iPhones. It ended up happening, of course. The iPhone 11 shipped with iOS 13 and some of the new features that came with it. But since launch day, we've seen more iOS updates over the course of a week and a half than that usually occur over months. In 11 days, we're now on iOS 13.1.2, with each update offering more bug fixes, more feature improvements, and still there's more to come with certain bugs that just exist, like an issue with iCloud reminders, and features that haven't launched yet at all, like the Deep Fusion camera feature. Whether you bought a new iPhone or you're on any of the recent iPhones from the last couple of years, you probably experienced some sort of a headache with iOS 13 by now. Even through all the updates, my iPhone 11 still has a couple iOS 13 related issues that I experience from time to time. And ultimately, while it didn't end up being catastrophic, the launch of iOS 13 as a whole was very un-Apple-like. It was sloppy, to say the least. And fortunately, it didn't impact the launch of this phone, but all in all, it's been a surprising week and a half, given just how many updates we've seen, and how many more updates are still likely to come. So one thing I haven't yet mentioned is the design and build of the iPhone 11. And that's because obviously this is essentially the same phone as last year. Every iPhone has basically been the same for the last 3 years now, with a metal and glass build, notched display, and a few color options. The color options on the iPhone 11 this year are a bit different than the XR from last year. There's some new ones like this purple color, and overall they're more of a muted pastel shade, so they're not as bright and vibrant. People seem to like colors, so that's always why I mention it, but yeah, I think we can all agree that the design of the iPhone is definitely starting to see some age. It doesn't matter if you spend $700 here for the iPhone 11 or over $1,000 on the 11 Pro, you're getting the same thing. The color options are different, like I said, and yeah, the texture of the glass is different between the phones, but whatever, it's the same phone aside from the screen sizes, and it's been the same phone for years now. It's certainly time for Apple to offer a major refresh with these devices. Obviously, this year wasn't it, so if you're waiting for that major refresh, you have at least another year to wait. Now, a couple other things to mention real quick before I give my final thoughts. There are a handful of other smaller minor improvements and things to talk about, like the better sounding speakers, which are definitely noticeable. The phone is still water resistant, it's got wireless charging, faster Wi-Fi and LTE, and improvements in Bluetooth. Just little updates and things you'd expect, but nothing was taken away over last year, and there really are no other big major updates or features added on. So here's the bottom line. Like I said at the beginning of this video, I think Apple made it even harder this year to justify making the jump to an iPhone 11 Pro or Pro Max. Screen size is a thing, sure, they're all different sizes and everyone has a preference. But feature-wise, the 11 Pro offers an OLED display, a telephoto lens that most people probably wouldn't notice or even utilize, a sorta kinda but not really different design and build, but it's basically the same, and vastly improved battery life that only approaches the iPhone 11 anyway. It's not any better. All those things don't really add up to $300 or $400 more value in my opinion. That's why I'm once again sticking with the iPhone 11 this year, and that's why I think most other people will too. This really is the iPhone for everyone once again, and I think it's the best value iPhone that Apple has ever offered. So there you go. Those are all of my thoughts on the new iPhone 11. Definitely let me know what you guys think of this new iPhone. If you have it, be sure to let me know your experience, or if you're in the market for one, let me know if you have any thoughts of your own or any questions about it that I can answer. Be sure to follow TechDaily on Twitter and subscribe to the TechDaily YouTube channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys later.